Chapter 4. Sorting with a Side of Threats. King's Cross Station was as loud and busy as any battlefield Tom and Jerry had ever known. Trains rumbled, luggage wheels squeaked, trolleys clattered. People shouted, whistles blew, and somewhere someone dropped something metal that clanged like a gong. For Harry, sandwiched between Uncle Vernon's angry muttering, Aunt Petunia's pinched disapproval, and Dudley's wide-eyed stare at everything remotely magical, it was all a dizzying blur. For Tom and Jerry, it was a playground. Tom rode at the top of Harry's trunk like a fuzzy grey-blue figurehead on a ship, claws dug into the sides for balance as the trolley bumped over the cracks in the floor. Every now and then he gave someone who got too close a withering look, as if to say, "Hands off, this boy's taken." Jerry, of course, had appointed himself chief navigator. He stood on the handle of the trolley, one paw wrapped tightly around the metal, the other shading his eyes as he scanned the signs overhead. Every time Harry took a wrong step, Jerry yanked on his sleeve or pointed with great urgency, nearly falling off in his excitement. They passed platforms 9 and 10. No 9 3/4. Uncle Vernon loomed over Harry, moustache curling nastily. "Well, there you are, boy. Platform 9, platform 10. No such thing as 9 3/4. Have a good term," he sneered, making term sound like a disease. The Dursleys marched off, Dudley already whining for an ice cream. Harry stood alone between two platforms, pushing a trolley with a trunk, an owl, a cat, and a mouse. He'd never felt more conspicuous. Jerry tugged on his cuff. He pointed at Harry's feet, then at the floor sign for 9, then at 10, then raised both arms in a big shrug. "Where's it hiding?" Tom hopped down, sniffing the air suspiciously, as if the platform number might have a smell. Harry's heart thudded. What if this is all some huge joke?" he whispered to Tom and Jerry. "Or a mistake? What if there isn't a Hogwarts, and it's just packed with muggles, of course. Where else would it be?" The crisp, brisk voice interrupted his panic. A plump woman with flaming red hair bustled past, surrounded by several red-headed children and several trunks loaded with owl cages. Harry's ears pricked at the word muggles. Jerry's ears pricked at the word packed, usually associated in his mind with lunch or biscuits. Tom's ears pricked at the sight of another owl's cage. Hedwig clicked her beak warningly. Harry followed the family, heart pounding. "Now, what's the platform number?" the woman asked her children. 9 3/4, chorused a pair of identical red-haired twins. Harry's jaw dropped. They saw it? Jerry grabbed Harry's sleeve and pointed. Follow them now!" The oldest boy, with a shiny prefect badge, went first. He walked straight toward the solid barrier between platforms 9 and 10, and disappeared. Jerry's mouth fell open. He mimed running into the wall and flattening like a pancake. Tom winced at the mental image. One by one, the redheads vanished through the barrier. Harry swallowed hard. "Well," the mother said kindly when she saw him hovering nearby, clutching his trolley handle in white fingers, "are you going to Hogwarts too?" "Just walk straight at the barrier, dear. Best do it at a bit of a run if you're nervous." A bit of a run? Harry looked at the barrier. Jerry gulped. He wrapped his tiny arms around one of the trolley bars and braced his feet. Tom dug his claws into the trunk and flattened his ears. "Okay," Harry murmured, more to them than to himself. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. They ran. The barrier rushed up at them. Jerry squeezed his eyes shut. Tom's silent scream was half terror, half "I told you being a wizard was dangerous." And then they were through. No crash, no broken noses, squashed mice or pancaked cats. Just a burst of steam, a crowd of robed students, and the gleaming scarlet engine of the Hogwarts Express, its black and gold sign shining proudly overhead. "Platform 9 3/4. Hedwig hooted softly, shifting in her cage. Tom and Jerry peeked around in amazement. Magic still took some getting used to, even for a cat and mouse who'd watched a giant twist guns into knots and walls rearrange themselves. Harry finally found an empty compartment and wrestled his trunk inside with help from the red-headed family. Hagrid had already left him at the barrier with a clap on the shoulder and a promise to see him at the school. Tom jumped up to the luggage rack, hesitated, and then chose instead to curl on the seat next to Harry. Jerry did a lightning-quick sweep of the compartment edges, checking for threats, dogs, traps Aunt Petunia somehow smuggled aboard, then hopped up to Harry's shoulder and made himself comfortable. The train whistled and jolted into motion. Houses and roads blurred away. They were really going. Harry pressed his face to the window, watching. Tom sat beside him, eyes wide, tail curled around his paws. Jerry leaned forward so far he nearly tipped off Harry's shoulder. "Mind if I sit in here?" A lanky, red-headed boy stood in the doorway, his nose spattered with freckles, his clothes a bit too big. His ears were pink. He looked nervous, hopeful, and hungry all at once. "Everywhere else is full," he added quickly. Harry smiled. "Sure, sit down." Tom narrowed his eyes, assessing the new arrival. Jerry sniffed the air suspiciously. New human meant new habits, new smells, and, most importantly, potentially new versions of Dudley. The boy flopped into the seat opposite. "I'm Ron, by the way, Ron Weasley." "Harry," Harry said. Ron's eyes flicked to his scar. His jaw dropped. "Blimey, are you? I mean, you are him, aren't you?" Jerry rolled his eyes. He reached for a stray crumb on Ron's sleeve, then stopped, nose twitching. A different smell. A rodent smell. He sniffed again. It wasn't his smell or another mouse. It was older, mustier, laid back, slightly lazy. Ron dug in his pocket. "Mum gave me this, Scabbers. Pathetic, really. He's been in our family for ages." He pulled out a fat, scruffy grey rat that looked like he'd lost at least one argument with a kitchen broom. The rat dangled limply, his whiskers twitching half-heartedly. His eyes were small and beady, but sharp. Too sharp. Tom perked up instantly. Competition. He crept closer, tail low, eyes gleaming. Jerry moved at the exact same time, but with a very different expression. His nose wrinkled in distaste. He knew other rodents, mice, voles, even the occasional squirrel. This rat felt wrong. Scabbers gave a lazy squeak. Tom's ears twitched. His claws flexed. Jerry slid down Harry's sleeve like a tiny firefighter's pole and landed soundlessly near Ron's knee. He peered up at Scabbers, arms folded, expression serious. Scabbers' eyes flicked down. Their gazes met. For a brief moment, the air between them crackled. Jerry took Scabbers in with one look. The too-still tail, the missing toe, the not-quite-genuine limpness. Rats could be lazy, but they usually oozed open greed. This one oozed calculation, like he was pretending to be lazier than he actually was. Jerry's whiskers twitched. He did not like it. Tom, misreading everything, assumed Jerry was sizing up a snack competitor. He smirked and, in one smooth bound, leapt lightly onto the seat beside Ron, pretending to be utterly uninterested while very casually inching towards Scabbers with murder in his eyes. "Is that your cat?" Ron asked Harry, watching Tom's careful prowl. "He looks determined." "You have no idea," Harry muttered. Jerry planted himself on the seat between Tom and Scabbers and threw his arms wide, an unlikely, tiny barrier of determination. He glared at Tom. "Not yet. Something's off." Tom looked at Jerry, then at Scabbers, then back at Jerry, utterly confused. Rat, hunt, enemy, what was there to think about? Jerry signalled rapidly with his paws, tilting his head, pointing at his eyes, making a little spiral for weird. Then he pantomimed removing a mask from his face and revealing something else beneath. Tom stared. Then he mimed eating the mask and shrugged. Jerry huffed, exasperated. Ron, oblivious, poked Scabbers' stomach. "He's useless, really. Doesn't do anything. Look." He laid the rat on his lap. Scabbers flopped dramatically, tongue lolling. Jerry narrowed his eyes further. Overacting, that's what that was. The trolley came soon after, with a kindly witch calling, "Anything off the trolley, dears?" Harry, who had never had money for sweets, bought half the cart. Chocolate frogs, Bertie Bott's every flavour beans, cauldron cakes, pumpkin pasties. Tom and Jerry fell in love with the wizarding world all over again. Tom discovered that chocolate frogs moved. His first instinct was to pounce, claws out. He smacked one flat against the compartment window. The frog peeled slowly down, leaving a chocolate smear. Tom licked it, his eyes crossed in delight. Jerry, more methodical, lined up a few beans and sniffed each one carefully before eating. He learned very quickly that every flavour was not an exaggeration. He bit into one and his entire body stiffened. His face turned a ghastly green. He pointed frantically to his tongue, then mimed scrubbing it with both paws. Harry checked the card. "Sprouts," he read. "You got a sprout-flavoured one." Jerry collapsed theatrically. Tom snickered behind a paw. In the midst of the feast, Scabbers still lay on Ron's lap, asleep. Jerry watched him between bites, eyes never truly leaving the rat. Every so often, Scabbers' tail would twitch in a way that didn't match his supposed slumber. At one point, as Ron leaned forward to see Harry's chocolate frog cards, Scabbers' eyes snapped open, just for a second. They swept the compartment. Harry, Ron, Tom licking his paw on the luggage rack, Jerry nibbling cautiously on a cauldron cake crumb. The rat's gaze stuck on Jerry. Scabbers' pupils narrowed. He made the tiniest movement with his whiskers, almost like a smirk. Then Ron shifted, and the moment broke. Scabbers flopped lifeless again. Jerry's fur prickled down his spine. He'd spent years dodging Aunt Petunia's traps, Dudley's shoes, and Spike's jaws. He knew when something was pretending to be harmless. He tugged on Harry's sleeve. Harry glanced down. "What is it?" Jerry pointed at Scabbers, then drew a little mask in the air, then tapped his own nose and shook his head. "He's not what he looks like." Harry followed his gaze, saw a lazy old rat, and shrugged. "He just looks sleepy to me." Jerry threw up his tiny hands. Tom shrugged too. Rat was a rat. Jerry was just jealous of a new rodent in town. Funny, given how they'd reacted to Hedwig. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of sweets, card trading with Ron, introductions to Hermione, who poked her head in, asked brisk questions, and frowned at Tom and Jerry as if trying to categorize them, and Malfoy's brief antagonistic visit, during which Tom and Jerry both hissed and bared teeth in unison, impressively intimidating for creatures that small. As the train slowed and the Scottish countryside darkened outside, everyone changed into robes. Tom used Harry's spare tie as a hammock between the luggage rack and the compartment wall, lazily swinging, pretending not to be excited. Jerry put Harry's tie on his head like a long, droopy wizard hat and paraded around until he tripped over it and face-planted into a pumpkin pasty. Then came boats across a dark lake, Hagrid's booming call, and the first sight of Hogwarts Castle looming against the starry sky like something carved out of the night itself. Even Tom, who usually pretended to be unimpressed by everything, sat up straight, eyes wide. Jerry's jaw fell open so far his whiskers trembled. Lights twinkled in dozens of windows. Towers and turrets pointed at the moon. It was everything Harry had imagined, and nothing like he'd imagined at all. "Welcome to Hogwarts," Hagrid called. Inside, the castle was a maze of stone, portraits, and floating candles. McGonagall, stern and precise, gathered the first years. Tom and Jerry immediately sized her up as someone exactly like Aunt Petunia if Aunt Petunia could turn into a cat, and probably enjoyed it. As they waited outside the Great Hall, rumours about sorting spread among the nervous students. "We have to fight a troll, I've heard," someone whispered. "Nah, it's a test. Make you do magic, and if you're rubbish, they chuck you out." Tom flexed his claws, intrigued. Trolls could be fun. Jerry, less enthusiastic about trolls, clung to Harry's collar and hoped the test involved biscuits. They were shepherded into the hall. Rows of older students sat at 4 long tables, their faces curious as they watched the newbies file in. Candles floated in mid-air above them, bobbing gently like weightless lanterns. The ceiling shimmered with the reflection of the night sky outside, making it look as if they were standing under the open heavens. Tom looked up and nearly toppled over. He swiped at a candle, missed, and glared when it bobbed just out of reach, flame untouched. Jerry stared at the starry ceiling, then at the actual walls, then put both paws on his head, as if trying to keep his brain from leaking out with the sheer wonder of it. At the front of the hall, on a stool, lay the shabbiest hat Harry had ever seen. It was patched, frayed, and sagging, like it had been sat on by a hippogriff. Everyone stared. Tom yawned. A hat. Big deal. Then the hat twitched. A tear near the brim creased open into a mouth, and the hat began to sing. Tom lost all dignity. He arched his back, shot straight up, and landed halfway up Harry's arm, fur on end. Jerry dove for cover into Harry's robe sleeve, then peeked out, blinking. The song wasn't particularly frightening. It was almost jaunty, about houses, bravery, cunning, wit, hard work. Still, hats weren't supposed to sing.
When the song ended, Professor McGonagall started calling names. Students walked up, trembling, sat on the stool, and had the hat dropped on their heads. After a moment, the hat would shout a house name: Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Gryffindor, and the appropriate table would cheer and clap. Jerry watched, fascinated. Tom narrowed his eyes at the hat. Any object that could read minds was a direct threat to their mischief. Then McGonagall called, "Potter, Harry!" The hall fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned to him. Harry's legs felt like they'd turned to jelly. Tom's fur bristled. Jerry squeezed Harry's shoulder with both paws until his little arms shook. "You'll be great," Harry whispered, more to his friends than to himself, and walked slowly forward. Tom and Jerry clung to him like furry accessories. There was no rule about animals not being there. Probably. Harry sat on the stool. The hat slipped down over his eyes. Everything went dark. Except not entirely dark. Inside the hat, a musty smell of dust and old leather filled Harry's nose. He heard a small, thoughtful voice in his ear. Difficult. Very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. Talent, oh my goodness, yes. And a thirst to prove yourself. Where shall I put you? Harry's heart thudded. Not Slytherin, he thought immediately. Not Slytherin. The hat hummed. Slytherin, eh? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin... There was no rule about animals not being there. Probably. Harry sat on the stool. The hat slipped down over his eyes. Everything went dark, except not entirely dark. Inside the hat, a musty smell of dust and old leather filled Harry's nose. He heard a small, thoughtful voice in his ear. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. Talent, oh my goodness, yes. And a thirst to prove yourself. Where shall I put you? Harry's heart thudded. Not Slytherin, he thought immediately. Not Slytherin. The hat hummed. Slytherin, eh? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. There's no doubt about that. A tiny paw tapped its brim. The hat paused. What on earth? Jerry had decided he was not leaving Harry's fate in the hands or brim of some singing piece of cloth. The instant the hat had come down over Harry's eyes, Jerry had seen his chance. He scrambled up Harry's robe, launched himself off Harry's shoulder, and wriggled under the edge of the sorting hat, slipping into the darkness like a particularly determined crumb. Inside, he found himself in a small, warm fabric cave with a cranky, disembodied voice. "Well," the hat said, more startled than angry, "this is new. I don't sort mice." Jerry planted his tiny feet, narrowed his eyes, and went to work. He couldn't talk, but he could gesture, and he could threaten. The hat, being very old and very magical, could sense minds and intentions, and Jerry's mind was shouting loud and clear. He jabbed a paw into the hat's inner brim, then pointed emphatically in one direction, away from the cold, ambitious pull he sensed when the hat fought Slytherin. Then he mimed a lion's mane around his head, claws out, roaring silently. His little charade screamed, "Brave, red, gold, lions, Gryffindor." The hat sounded amused. "Oh ho, a persuasive little fellow, aren't you? But I don't take orders from rodents." Jerry narrowed his eyes. He reached into his invisible pocket and produced one of his most powerful tools, an imaginary mallet. Of course, it wasn't really there, but the sorting hat, sensitive to intent and story and threat, felt it. Jerry hefted it with both paws, exaggerated the weight, then slowly, very slowly, raised it over his head and let his gaze travel meaningfully across the inner seams of the hat. The hat shuddered. Now, it said nervously, "no need for violence. I am a revered artifact." Jerry waggled the mallet.
Then, with great theatricality, he mimed bringing it down, wham, on the fabric next to him. He didn't actually hit, didn't want to concuss Harry via hat, but his intent was crystal clear. He then drew a little hole in the air, pointed at it, then at the Great Hall, then at the hat, essentially promising, "I can embarrass you in front of everyone." For added emphasis, he pulled out the imaginary frying pan. This time, the hat felt the echo of every cartoon thwack Tom and Jerry had ever given one another. "Is that really necessary?" the hat quavered. "I am simply doing my job." Jerry rolled his eyes and patted his tiny heart, then pointed at Harry, him, and then traced a heart shape in the air around the two of them. He finished with an emphatic lion gesture again. His charade said, "He's my friend, he's brave, he belongs with the brave people, or else." The hat muttered, "Bravery, loyalty, stubbornness bordering on lunacy. Well, you're certainly Gryffindor material yourself, little pest. All right, no need to get your whiskers in a twist, if he really doesn't want Slytherin." Images flickered in Harry's mind, proud, red and gold. "Well, you're certainly Gryffindor material yourself, little pest. All right, no need to get your whiskers in a twist, if he really doesn't want Slytherin." Images flickered in Harry's mind, proud, red and gold, roaring fires, laughter, courage. Jerry crossed his arms and tapped his foot impatiently. The hat sighed. "Better be." "Gryffindor!" it bellowed aloud. The hall exploded into cheering. Jerry punched the air, grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. He dropped the mallet and pan back into their imaginary hammer space, patted the hat's inner brim twice in thanks, and, with a neat twist, wriggled back out just as Harry ripped the hat off. Light blinded Jerry. He blinked, clinging to the edge of the stool, as Harry stumbled toward the cheering Gryffindor table, face flushed with relief. Tom, who had been pacing anxiously on the floor, tail a furry metronome, saw Harry's grin and the direction he was walking, and whooped silently. He launched. Tom, who had been pacing anxiously on the floor, tail a furry metronome, saw Harry's grin and the direction he was walking, and whooped silently. He launched himself after Harry, bounded up onto the Gryffindor bench, and knocked into a goblet, sending pumpkin juice sloshing, but no one cared. They were too busy clapping Harry on the back. Jerry scrambled up Harry's robes and perched proudly on his shoulder, chest out. "You okay?" Harry whispered to him over the din. Jerry nodded, then, with smug satisfaction, mimed a hat on his head, a hammer, and then thumping the hammer into obedience. Harry's eyes widened. You threatened the sorting hat?" Jerry shrugged modestly, as if to say, "Just doing my job." Across the hall at the staff table, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. He'd caught a flicker of very strange magic from the hat, and now saw a little mouse preening on Harry's shoulder. He lifted his goblet to his lips, hiding a smile. The sorting continued. Ron joined Harry at Gryffindor, to Harry's delight. Hermione did too, after a brief hesitation from the hat. Tom and Jerry both cheered as loudly as they could without making actual sound when she sat down. Scabbers, who had been stuffed back into Ron's pocket for the ceremony, stuck his nose out just enough to sniff the air. His beady eyes took in the Gryffindor table. Harry, Tom, Jerry. His gaze lingered on Jerry. Jerry met it head-on, unblinking. Tiny minds, big suspicions. Soon the plates filled magically with food, and the feast began. Roasts, potatoes, vegetables, puddings. It was like all of Aunt Petunia's cooking had been replaced by the dreams Harry never allowed himself to dream. He dug in, laughing with Ron, listening to Percy's pompous explanations, trying to take in ghosts drifting through tables, and a poltergeist named Peeves pelting students with peas. Tom and Jerry, naturally, made it their mission to try everything. Jerry darted from platter to platter, grabbing the tiniest bits. No one noticed, because as soon as a serving dish emptied, it refilled itself. He tasted mashed potatoes, flinched at sprouts, nearly swooned at treacle tart. He ended up lying on his back on Harry's shoulder, paws on his stomach, groaning blissfully. Tom walked along the hot platters like a tightrope artist, tail high for balance, swiping at chicken bones and crisp bits of fat, ferrying them back to Harry's plate like offerings. Once he misjudged a leap and landed in the gravy boat. He emerged horrified, slicked in brown sauce. Jerry howled with silent laughter, slapping the table. Tom flicked a glob of gravy at him. It hit a nearby third year instead. The third year looked up, glared at a first year and declared, "Watch it!" Bickering ensued. Tom and Jerry high-fived behind Harry's pumpkin juice. Even in all the joy and wonder, Jerry's attention flicked back regularly to Ron's pocket. Scabbers occasionally shifted, just enough for the fabric to twitch. Something about that rat tickled a deep wariness in Jerry's instincts, the same way the cupboard door had when Aunt Petunia was in a certain mood. As Dumbledore stood to give his odd little speech, "Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak," Jerry watched him with interest. This was the man Hagrid had pointed out as the greatest wizard of the age. He did not look like what Jerry expected of a boss of bosses, more like someone's distracted granddad who had accidentally worn all his favourite curtains at once. But his eyes were sharp. Jerry trusted sharp eyes. When the feast ended and the Gryffindors followed Percy through the castle, up shifting staircases and past whispering portraits, Tom and Jerry kept close to Harry's heels, not daring to be left behind in this enormous, tricksy building. They reached the Gryffindor common room at last, round, warm, and filled with squashy armchairs, crimson hangings, and the low murmur of excited voices. It felt like a hearth turned into a room. Harry climbed the spiral stairs to the boys' dormitory with Ron, Seamus, Neville, and Dean. Tom bounded up beside him, trading glares with a stern portrait of a suit of armour. Jerry rode in Harry's pocket, occasionally popping out to memorize the route. In the dormitory, 4 poster beds waited, red curtains drawn back. Trunks were already there, brought up from the train. Harry flopped onto his bed, exhausted, happy. Tom hopped up, kneading the duvet with expert paws until it fluffed perfectly. Jerry scrambled up the bedpost, waved at Hedwig in her cage, who now sat on Harry's trunk, preening, and then climbed onto the bed as well. Ron sat on the bed next to Harry's, pulled Scabbers from his pocket, and plopped him on the blanket. "We made it," Harry said to Ron, feeling sleep pressing at his eyes. "Yeah," Ron yawned, "and in Gryffindor too. My whole family's been in Gryffindor." He puffed a little with pride. Tom purred at Harry's feet, settling in comfortably. Jerry curled up against Harry's shoulder. But even as his eyes drooped, Jerry kept one ear tilted towards Scabbers. Neville tripped over his own trunk. Seamus asked loudly if anyone knew how to turn water into rum. Dean put up a football poster that moved a bit when you weren't looking. Ron snored a little. Scabbers lay still. Jerry stared at him. He thought back to the Sorting Hat, to how it had tried to nudge Harry towards Slytherin before he'd convinced it otherwise. Hats could be pushed. What about rats? Jerry crawled slowly down Harry's sleeve, slid soundlessly onto the floor, and padded over to Ron's bed. Tom cracked one eye, then rolled it, but watched, just in case. Jerry climbed the bedside table leg, reached the top, and inched closer to Scabbers. Up close, his sense of wrongness grew stronger. Scabbers stank of something stale and old under the rat smell. Fear and cunning layered together like too many coats. He wasn't merely a pet. He felt watchful, even in sleep. Jerry leaned in until their whiskers almost touched. "Who are you?" his tiny, suspicious eyes seemed to say. Scabbers' eyelids flickered. For the barest moment, the rat's beady eyes cracked open, fixing on Jerry with a cold, assessing stare that had nothing of lazy pet in it. Then, as footsteps approached in the corridor, Scabbers' eyes slipped closed again. His breathing deepened. He went limp. Just a rat. Jerry's nose twitched. He wasn't fooled. He reached into his invisible pocket again, fingered the handle of his mental mallet, then slowly let it go. Not yet. Too many humans. Too many questions. Too new. He backed away, patted Harry's hand once for reassurance, and settled at last against Harry's neck. As the candles dimmed and soft snores filled the room, Tom curled into a ball at Harry's feet, whiskers twitching as he dreamed of Cleopatra, of chasing levitating candles, and of scaring Draco Malfoy. Jerry drifted towards sleep, with images of a smug, singing hat and a suspicious rat turning over in his mind. The Sorting Hat, back in the headmaster's office now, trembled faintly, as if still feeling the echo of one small mouse's threats. Dumbledore, tidying a pile of socks, smiled to himself without looking up. and somewhere in a tangle of blanket and red hair a rat's whiskers twitched, as if hiding secrets that would one day come crawling out. Harry Potter had made it to Hogwarts. He was a Gryffindor, thanks to one very determined mouse. And Tom and Jerry, who had never in their lives imagined a world beyond the cupboard under the stairs and Spike's garden, were now firmly ensconced in a castle full of secrets, ghosts, magical food, and one rat who, Jerry was sure of it, was much, much more than he seemed.